Women Who Run with the Wolves, Afterword, Story as Medicine. Here I will lay out for you the ethos of story in my family's ethnic traditions, those that my story-making and poetry are rooted in, and a bit about my use of las palabras, words, and los cuentos, stories, for assisting the life of the soul. To my eyes, historias que son medicina, stories are medicine. Wherever a fairy tale is told, it becomes night, no matter where the dwelling, no matter the time, no matter the season. The telling of tales causes a starry night and a white moon to creep from the eaves and hover over the heads of the listeners. Sometimes by the end of the tale, the chamber is filled with daybreak. Other times a star shard is left behind. Sometimes a ragged thread of storm sky. And whatever is left behind is the bounty to work with, to use, toward the soul making. My work in the humus of stories does not come from my training as a psychoanalyst alone, but equally from my long life as the child of a deeply ethnic and non-literate family heritage. Although my people could not read or write, or did so haltingly, they were wise in ways that are often lost to modern culture. There were times in my growing up years that stories and jokes and songs and dances were demonstrated at the table during a meal, or at a wedding, or at a wake. But most of what I carry, tell raw, or write into literary stories was received not while sitting in a formal circle, but during hard work, tasks requiring intensity and concentration. To my mind, story, in every possible way, thrives only on hard work, intellectual, spiritual, familial, physical, and integral. It never comes easy. It is never just picked up or studied in one's off times. Its essence cannot be born nor maintained in air-conditioned comfort. It cannot grow to any depths in an enthusiastic but non-committed mind. Neither can it live in gregarious but shallow environs. Story cannot be studied. It is learned through assimilation, through living in its proximity with those who know it, live it, and teach it, more so through all the day-to-day mundane tasks of life, much more than the clearly ceremonial times. The healing medicine of story does not exist in a vacuum. It cannot exist divorced from its spiritual source. It cannot be taken on as a mix-and-match project. There is an integrity to a story that comes from a real life lived in it. A story is clearly illumined from being raised up in it. In my family's oldest traditions, which stretch far back, as my abuelitas say, for as many generations as there are generations, the times for story, the tales chosen, the exact words employed to convey them, the tones of voice used for each, the endings and beginnings, the unfolding of the text, and especially the intention behind each, are most often dictated by an acute inner sensibility, more so than by any outer pull or opportunity. Some traditions set aside specific times for telling stories. Among my friends from several Pueblo tribes, stories of coyote are reserved for winter telling. My comrades and relatives in the south of Mexico tell about the great wind from the east in the springtime only. In my foster family, certain tales cooked in their Eastern European heritage are told only in autumn after harvest. In my blood family, my El Dia de los Muertos, stories are traditionally begun in early winter and carried on through the dark of winter until the return of spring. In the old and integral healing rites germane to curanderismo and the Mesemondok, every detail is weighed and very carefully against the tradition. When to tell a story, which story, and to whom, how long and in what form, what words and under which conditions. We carefully consider the time, the place, the health or the lack of health of the person, the mandates in the person's inner and outer lives, and several other critical factors as well, in order to arrive at the medicine needed. In the most basic ways, there is a spirit, both holy and whole, behind our ages-old rituals, and we tell stories when we are summoned by their covenant with us, and not vice versa. In using story as medicine, as in a vigorous psychoanalytic training, as well as in other rigorously taught and supervised healing arts, we are trained carefully to know what to do and when, but most especially we are trained in what not to do. This, perhaps, more than anything, separates stories as entertainment, a worthy form in and of itself, from stories as medicine. In my farthest back culture, although we bridge the modern world, there is at the root a timeless storyteller legacy, wherein one teller hands down his or her stories and the knowledge of the medicine in them to one or more las semilas, seed persons. Seeds are people who have the gift from birth onward. They are the future story keeps, whom the elder has hopes for. Those who have shown a talent are recognizable. Several old ones will agree and squire them and help and protect them while they learn. The lucky ones will, with much difficulty, discomfort, and inconvenience, enter a rigorous and many years-long course of work. It will teach them to carry the tradition as they learned it, and with all the proper preparations, blessings, percussions, essential insight, ethics, and attitudes that constitute the body of healing knowledge according to its requirements, not theirs, according to its initiations, according to its prescribed forms. These forms and lengths of time in training cannot be shunted aside or modernized. They cannot be learned in a few weekends or a few years' time. They demand long periods of time for a reason, and that is so that the work does not become trivialized, changed, or misused, as it often does when in the wrong hands, or when used for the wrong reasons, or when appropriated with all good intention, coupled with ignorance. No good can come from that. How seeds are chosen is a mysterious process that defies exact definition, except for those who know it well, for it is not based on a set of rules or imagination, but rather on time-honored relationship, face-to-face, one person to another. The elder chooses the younger, one chooses another. Sometimes they find their way to us, but more often we stumble upon each other, and both recognize the other as though over eons. Desire to be like this is not the same as being this. Typically, those in family who carry this talent are called out in childhood. The elders who carry the gift have their eyes peeled, often looking for the one who is sans piel, the skinless one, the one who feels so much and so deeply, who observes the larger patterns of life and the smaller details as well. They are looking, as I, now in my 5th decade, look for those who have come to certain acuities from having, for decades and for a lifetime, lived in careful listening. The training of curanderos, cantadoros y cuentistas is very similar, because in my heritage, stories are considered to be written like un tatuaje del destino, a light tattoo on the skin of one who has lived them. It is believed that talent in healing derives from the reading of this faint writing upon the soul and the development of what is found there. Story, as one part of a 5-part healing discipline, is considered the destiny of one who carries such inscribing. Not all carry such, but those who do have their own futures written upon them. They are called las únicas, those who are one of a kind. So one of the first questions we ask when we meet a teller or healer is, ¿Quiénes son tus familiares? ¿Quiénes son tus padres? Who are your people? In other words, from what family line of healers do you come? This does not mean what school did you go to. This does not mean what classes did you take, what workshops have you been to. It literally means from whose spiritual lines do you descend. As always, we look for authenticity in age, knowing rather than intellectual smartness, a religious devotion that is unshakable and embedded in daily life, the gentle courtesies and attitudes that are clearly inherent in a person who has knowledge of that source from which all healing derives. In the Cantadora Cuentista tradition, there are parents and grandparents, and sometimes madrinas y padrinos, grandparents of a story, and these being the person who taught the story and its meanings and momentum to you, who gifted you with it, the mother or father of the story, and the person who taught it to the person who taught it to you, abuelo or abuelo, grandfather or grandmother of the story. This is as it should be. Gaining explicit permission to tell another's tale and the proper crediting of that tale, if permission is given, is absolutely essential, for it maintains the genealogical umbilicus. We are on one end, the life-giving placenta on the other. It is a sign of respect, and one might say of befitting manners, in one properly raised in stories, to ask and receive permission, to not take work that has not been given freely, to respect the work of others, for their work and their lives together make the work they give out. A story is not just a story. In its most innate and proper sense, it is someone's life. It is the noumen of their life, and their first-hand familiarity with the stories they carry makes the story medicine. The godparents of the tale are those who gave a blessing along with the gifting of the story. Sometimes it takes a long, long time to tell the ancestry of a story before we can begin the story proper. This listing of the mother of the story and the grandmother of the story and so on is not a long, boring preamble, but spiced with small stories in and of itself. The longest story that follows is then like a second course, like at a feast. In every authentic story and healing tradition that I know, the relating of a story begins with the bringing up, hauling up of psychic contents, both collective and personal. The process is a long exertion in time and energy, both intellectual and spiritual. It is in no way an idle practice. It costs much and takes long. Though there are intercambiamos cuentos, story trades, where two people who have come to know each other well exchange stories as a gift to one another, this occurs because they have developed, if they were not born to it, a kinship relationship, and this is as it should be. Although some stories as entertainment alone, and although television in particular too often uses storylines that depict the necrosis of life, tales are, in one of their oldest senses, a healing art. Some are called to this healing art, and the best, by my lights, are those who have genuinely lain with the story and found all its matching parts inside themselves, and at depth. They have had a long mentorship, a long spiritual discipleship, and a long time perfecting their disciplines. Persons such as these are immediately recognizable by their presence alone. In dealing with stories, we are handling archetypal energy, which we could metaphorically describe as being like electricity. This electrical power can animate and enlighten, but in the wrong place, wrong time, wrong amount, wrong teller, wrong story, unprepared teller, person who may know some of what to do but does not know what not to do, like any medicine, it will not have the desired effect, or else a deleterious one. Sometimes people who are story collectors do not realize what they are asking when they ask for a story of this dimension or attempt to use it without blessing. Archetypes change us. Archetypes infuse a recognizable integrity, a recognizable endurance. If there is no change in the teller, there has been no fidelity. There has been no real contact with the archetype, no transmission, only rhetorical translation of self-interested aggrandizement. The handing down of a story is a large and far-reaching responsibility. To detail the parameters of such would fill several volumes, where I attempt to describe the healing processes in their completeness, using a story as a single component among many. But in the limited space here, let the most important part be conveyed, that we are charged to make certain that people are completely and fully wired for the stories they carry and tell. Among the best of the teller healers I know, and I have been blessed to know many, their stories grow out of their lives, as roots grow a tree. The stories have grown them into who they are. We can tell the difference. We know when someone has grown a story facetiously and when the story has genuinely grown them, it is the latter that underlines the integral traditions. Sometimes a stranger asks me for one of the stories I've mined, shaped, and carried over the years. As the keeper of these stories, given to me on the basis of promises asked for and promises kept, I do not separate them from the other words and rites that surround them, especially those developed and nurtured in the roots of familia. The choice depends on no 5-point plan, but on a science of soul. Relationships and relatedness are everything. The master-apprentice model provides the kind of careful atmosphere in which I have been able to help my learners seek and develop the stories that will accept them, that will shine through them, not just lay on the surface of their being like dime store jewelry. There are ways and there are ways. There are few easy ways, but no easy ways that I know of that also have integrity. There are much more and far more tortuous and difficult ways that have integrity and are worth it. Absolutely, one is enabled in the healing art, in the medicine of story, by the amount of self that one is willing to sacrifice and put into it. And I mean the word sacrifice in every nuance of the word. Sacrifice is not a suffering that one chooses oneself, nor is it a convenient suffering in which the terminus is controlled by the sacrificee. Sacrifice is not a great striving or even a substantial discomfort. It is in some wise entering a hell not of one's own making, and returning from it fully chastened, fully focused, fully devoted, no more, no less. There is a saying in my family, the gatekeeper of the stories will exact their due from you. That is, force you to live a certain kind of life, a daily discipline, bend you to many years of studies, not idle study as the ego finds convenient, but one built upon exacting patterns and requirements. I cannot emphasize this enough. In the family traditions of dealing with story, in the Mesemondok, as well as in the Quentista traditions, I learned and have used since I was a child, there is what is called la invitada, the guest, that is, the empty chair, this being present at every telling in one way or another. Sometimes during a tell, the soul of one or more of the listeners comes and sits there, for it has a need, and although I may have an entire evening of material I had carefully considered, I may change the progression to accommodate, to mend, or play with the sense of spirit that comes to the empty chair. The guest speaks for the needs of all. I tell people to do their own mining of stories from their own lives and insist upon it with those I teach, especially the stories from their own heritages. For if at the least one turns away to the tales directly from the translators of Grimm's, for instance, then the tales of their personal heritage, as soon as their old ones die off, shall be lost to them forever. I am a strong supporter of those who bring back the stories of their heritages, preserving them, saving them from death by neglect. Of course, it is the old people who are the bones of the entire healing and spiritual structures everywhere on the face of the earth. Look to your people, your life. It is not by accident that this advice is the same amongst great healers and great writers as well. Look to the real that you yourself live. The kind of tales found there can never come from books. They come from eyewitness accounts. The authentic mining of stories from one's own life and the lives of one's own people and the modern world as it relates to one's own life as well means that there will be discomfort and trials. You know you are on the right path if you have experienced these, the scraped knuckles, the sleeping on cold ground, not once but over and over again, the groping in the dark, the walking in circles in the night, the bone-chilling revelations, and the hair-raising adventures on the way. These are worth everything. There must be a little, and in many cases a good deal of blood spilled on every story, on every aspect of your own life, if it is to carry the Newman, if a person is to carry a true medicine. I hope you will go out and let stories, that is life, happen to you, and that you will work with these stories from your life not someone else's life. Water them with your blood and tears and your laughter until they bloom, till you yourself burst into bloom. That is the work, the only work. Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa, Pinkola, Estés. Addendum. In response to readers asking about various aspects of my work and life, we have expanded some sections of this work in small ways, adding several anecdotes, clarifications, and various additional notes, expanding the afterword, and publishing here a prose poem for the first time that was part of the original manuscript. All of these ministrations were done carefully without disturbing the cadence of the work. 3 years later. Many readers have written to express appreciation, to share news of their reading groups who have been studying Women Who Run with the Wolves, and to send blessings and inquiries about future works. They have read this book carefully and closely, and often more than once. In all, I have been gently astonished to find that the spiritual roots of my work, even though quietly stated in the subtext of this book, were so evident to so many readers. My warmest gratitude for readers' blessings sent our way, their kind words, thoughtful insights, great generosities of heart, beautiful gifts made by hand, and their abundant gestures for strengthening and sheltering, such as including my work, the welfare of my family and loved ones, and myself, in their everyday devotions. All of these gestures are preciously held in my heart. Long ago, but not so far away. Here I will try to comment on some of the interest that readers have conveyed to us. Many have asked about how the writing of Women Who Run with the Wolves began. The writing began long before the writing began. It began by being born into the unusual and quixotic family structures that El Destino had prepared for me. It began with decades of being filled up by heartbreaking beauty and seeing much hope lost in cultural, societal, and other kinds of storms. It began as a result of loves and lives both harsh and dear. The writing began long before the writing began. This I can say with confidence. The actual physical writing began by hand in 1971, after a pilgrimage from the desert to my home place, where I asked for and received blessings from my elders to write a special body of work rooted in the soul language of our spiritual roots. Promises were given by all in many directions then, and have been kept all these years, and to the letter, the most important being, do not forget us and what we have suffered for. Women Who Run with the Wolves is the first part of a 5-part series encompassing 100 tales on the inner life. The entire 2,200 pages of work took just over 20 years to write. In its essence, the work strives to depathologize the integral instinctual nature and to demonstrate its soulful and essential psychic ties to the natural world. The basic premise that runs through all my work asserts that all human beings are born gifted. On voice. The work was perfectly written in a blend of the scholarly voice, via my training as a psychoanalyst, and equally so in the voice of the traditions of healing and hard work that reflect my ethnic origins, immigrant, lower working class, and Catholicos, all. The heritage of my growing up is the rhythm of labor, and this shapes me first and foremost as una poeta, as a poet. As it represents both a psychological and spiritual document, various bookshops have placed Women Who Run with the Wolves in several sections at the same time: psychology, poetry, women's studies, and religious studies. Some have said it defies category, or has begun a new one of its own. I do not know if this is so, but at its root I hoped it would be as much an artwork as a psychological work on spirit. A reader's note. Women Who Run with the Wolves strives to assist a conscious work of individuation. The book is best approached as a contemplative work that is written in 20-some sections. Each section stands on its own. 99% of the letters we receive relate how the reader is reading the work not only to themselves but also to and with a loved one, a mother, a daughter, granddaughter to grandmother, lover to lover, and in weekly or monthly reading groups. Because the work cannot be read in a week or a month's time, it lends itself to being studied. The work itself invites the personal lives of each reader to be weighed against what is proposed there, decided for or against, passed, close to, deepened, returned to, and seen through in an ongoing maturation process. Take your time reading. The work is written slowly over a long period of time. I wrote, went away, thought about it, came back, wrote some more, went away, thought some more, and came back and wrote some more. Most people read this work the way it was written, a little at a time, and then go away, think about it, and then come back again. Remember, psychology in its oldest sense means the study of the soul. Although essential and valuable insights have been contributed in the last century, and more will be contributed yet, the mapping of human nature in all its precious variety is far from complete. Psychology is not 100 years or so old. Psychology is thousands of years old. The names of many noble men and women who contributed to psychological knowledge are properly honored, but psychology did not begin there. It began with anyone and everyone who heard a voice greater than their own and who felt compelled to seek its source. Some have said that my work constitutes a newly emerging field. I must say with all due respect that the essence of the work I've been given to do is from a very old tradition. This kind of work does not fit restfully under the category of emerging anything. Thousands of people in every generation worldwide, mostly old ones who were often uneducated but wise in many ways, have watched over and protected its exact and intricate parameters. It's always been alive and thriving because they have been alive and thriving and held the work to certain shapes and means. A caveat. The matter of individual maturation is custom endeavor. There can be no rote, do this, then this. The process of each individual is unique and cannot be codified into a do these 10 steps and all will be well. This kind of work is not easy and is not for everyone. If you seek a healer, analyst, therapist, or counselor, make certain they derive from a discipline that has solid predecessors, that they truly know how to do what they hold themselves out as able to do. Ask friends, relatives, and co-workers whom you trust for their recommendations. Make certain whichever teacher you choose is trained and adequately in both methods and ethics. Life now. I am underground, writing and working much of the time, but there are occasional sightings. I continue to live as I have lived for many years now, ardently introverted, yet fiercely dedicated to striving to be in the world. I continue to work as analyst, poet, and writer, as well as caring for my large extended family. I continue to speak on social issues, persevere to record audio, paint, compose, translate, teach, and help to train young psychoanalysts. I teach literature, writing, psychology, mythopoetics, contemplative life, and other subjects at various universities as visiting scholar. Sometimes people ask what has been the most memorable event over the past few years. Certainly there have been many, but the one that pierced my heart completely was the happiness of the elders in our family when this work was first published. For them, the first book from one of their own in print ever, a particular image. When my 84-year-old father saw this book for the first time, he cried out in his broken English, "A book, a real book!" And there, right in his garden, he began to dance an old Tsibraki dance from the old country. The work. As cantadora, keeper of the old stories, and as an ethnic woman from 2 cultures, it would be hard not to recognize that humans are very diverse, culturally, psychologically, and otherwise. Such being so, it seems to me that it would be an error to think that any one way is the way. This particular work is offered as a contribution to what is known and what is needed in a true psychology of woman, one that includes all kinds of women that exist, and all the kinds of lives they lead. My observation and experience over these 20-some years of practice, both women and men, have led me to the idea that regardless of one's stage, or station in life, one must have psychological and spiritual strength in order to go forward, in small ways, as well as against the considerable winds that are from time to time in effect in every person's life. Strength does not come after one climbs the ladder or the mountain, nor after one makes it wherever that it represents. Strengthening oneself is essential to the process of striving, especially before and during, as well as after. It is my belief that attention to and devotion to the nature of soul represents the quintessential strength. There is much afoot at any given time that can make a shambles of soul and spirit by attempting to destroy intent or by pressuring one to forget the important questions. Questions such as, not only what are the pragmatics of a situation, but also, where is the soul in this matter? One proceeds in life, gains ground, reverses injustice, and stands against the winds through strength of spirit. This strengthening, whether with words, prayer, contemplations of various kinds, or by other means, comes from a noumen, a greatness that rests at the center of the psyche, and yet is greater than the whole of the psyche. This noumen is entirely accessible, must be attended to and nourished. It's existent, regardless of its many appellations, as an incontrovertible psychic fact. Difficult and rich, this is what a person in an authentic maturation finds at the